The blackness of space stretched endlessly around the human battleship Valor's edge. Captain Orion Vale stood at the viewing deck, his eyes fixed on the swirling blue light of the nebula frontier. Beyond that glowing storm lay the enemy, an alien armada belonging to the Sarathian Empire. For years, humanity and the Sarathians had fought over territory and resources, each calling the other invader. Orion had fought in more battles than he could count. He was a soldier born of Earth's hard times, a man who had lost friends and seen worlds fall. But even he could feel that this battle was different. Something about the silence before the storm felt heavier than usual, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. "Captain, the fleet reports readiness," said Lieutenant Rhea, his second in command. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "Good," Orion said, his voice calm. "Tell the fleet to hold formation. We'll meet them head-on." Moments later, the space around them filled with flashes of light. Hundreds of ships emerged from the nebula, sleek, curved Sarathian warships shining like blades in the dark. Their engines glowed violet as they took position, forming a crescent that surrounded the human fleet. Orion's heart tightened. "They're trying to encircle us. Adjust vector 30 degrees port side. We'll break their line before they close it." The first plasma bolt struck the Valor's edge. The ship trembled violently. Sparks flew from the ceiling as alarms filled the air. The war had begun again. For several minutes, the battle raged like a storm of light. Beams of energy crossed space, turning it into a deadly dance. Human destroyers tried to dodge the Sarathian lances, while the alien ships moved with graceful precision. Orion shouted orders, keeping his ship steady, firing, evading, striking back. Each explosion outside the window was another human life lost. Yet he refused to give in. Humanity had survived worse: plagues, wars, and the endless cold of space. They would survive this too, but fate had other plans. A sudden blast tore through the hull. A Sarathian missile had hit the ship's core section. The Valor's edge shuddered, alarms screaming louder than ever. "Main engine is gone," Rhea shouted. "We're losing power. Evacuate," Orion ordered. "All crew abandon ship." The corridors filled with smoke and red lights. Soldiers ran toward escape pods as the deck tilted under their feet. Orion stayed behind, trying to make sure everyone else got out first. He reached the last pod just as the ship's reactor began to overload. Rhea grabbed his arm. "Captain, come on. There's no time." He nodded and jumped in. The pod launched into space, spinning away as the Valor's edge exploded behind him. The shockwave threw the pod across the void like a leaf in a storm. He struggled to control it, but the systems were damaged. The display flickered, showing warnings in red. Unknown trajectory, entering gravitational field. A planet appeared below, green and silver, surrounded by a thin ring of ice. The pod screamed through the atmosphere, shaking violently. The heat shields glowed red. Then came the impact. Everything went black. When Orion opened his eyes, he was lying on soft, glowing ground. The air smelled sweet like flowers mixed with metal. His body ached, but he was alive. He looked around, tall silver trees, blue mist, and light floating like tiny fireflies. It was beautiful, but it wasn't Earth. He reached for his blaster, but before he could move, a sound came from behind. A group of tall figures stepped out of the mist. They wore silver armor and carried long, curved weapons that shimmered like glass. Their faces were hidden behind masks, and their skin had a faint blue hue. Sarathians. Orion froze. He had crashed right in the middle of enemy territory. One of the armored figures spoke in a melodic language he didn't understand. Then, with a gesture, two of them stepped forward and aimed their weapons at him. Orion raised his hand slowly. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to fight." They didn't understand his words, but his tone was enough. They didn't shoot. Instead, they surrounded him and motioned for him to follow. With no weapon and no way to escape, Orion obeyed. They led him through a glowing forest to a large structure that rose from the ground like a crystal mountain. The walls pulsed with light, alive like living glass. As they entered, Orion realized it wasn't just a palace, it was a living organism, grown rather than built. Inside, dozens of Sarathians watched as he was brought through long halls filled with soft humming energy. The guards stopped before a massive door carved with strange symbols. The door opened on its own, and Orion was pushed inside. The room was circular, filled with soft light. At its center sat a tall figure on a raised platform. She wore a crown of silver leaves, and her long robe shimmered with colors that changed as she moved. Her skin glowed faintly blue and her eyes, bright, intelligent, and cold, locked onto his, the Sarathian queen. Orion stood silent as the guards knelt before her. They spoke in their language, explaining his capture. The queen listened, her gaze never leaving him. Then she rose and walked closer. As she neared him, something strange happened. A symbol on her right arm, glowing faintly like a tattoo, suddenly flared with light. The guards gasped and dropped to one knee. The queen looked at her arm in shock, then at Orion. The light pulsed again. Orion looked down and saw a faint mark glowing on his chest, right where his uniform had torn. It matched the queen's mark exactly. He didn't understand what it meant, but the reaction of the guards told him it was something sacred. The queen spoke a few words softly, almost in disbelief. Then she turned to her soldiers and said something in a commanding tone. The guards hesitated, confused, but obeyed. They lowered their weapons. The queen's eyes softened. She studied him carefully as if trying to read his soul. Then she said a single word, slowly, clearly, in human language. Fate. Orion blinked. What did you say? She repeated the word. Fate. The guards looked at one another in awe. It was clear that the queen believed something extraordinary had happened. To them, this wasn't just a human intruder, it was someone chosen by destiny. But Orion had no idea why. He had only crashed here by accident. The queen motioned for the guards to take him away, but her tone was gentle now, almost respectful. As they led him through the corridors, Orion glanced back at her. For a moment, their eyes met again. In her calm gaze, he saw something unexpected. Not anger or hatred, but curiosity. And something else, something he couldn't name. When he was placed in a chamber to rest, he sat silently, trying to understand. His head still ached, and the strange mark on his chest glowed faintly in the dark. Fate, he muttered to himself. What did she mean by that? Outside his chamber, the alien guards whispered among themselves. One said the queen's mark has chosen him. The prophecy begins, the other replied, but he is human. That cannot be. Yet deep within the palace, Queen Lysara stood by the window of her throne room looking at the stars. Her hand rested on the glowing mark on her arm, her mind racing with questions. The ancient stories spoke of a warrior from beyond the stars who would appear when the Sarathian destiny was about to change. She had never believed those tales, until now. Somewhere out there, the human fleet still fought. The galaxy still burned with war. But here, in this quiet palace under alien skies, something new had begun. A connection neither side could have predicted. A human warrior had fallen from the heavens by mistake. And now, by the will of fate, he had become part of an alien queen's destiny. The sound of soft chimes woke Orion. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The air smelled strange, sweet and metallic, and sunlight filtered through walls that shimmered like glass. When he sat up, he realized the room around him wasn't built from stone or metal, but from something living. The walls pulsed gently as if the structure itself breathed. He touched the strange surface. It was warm. He sighed deeply. So I really am on their planet. His body ached from the crash, but the Sarathians had treated his wounds. A thin band of silver covered his shoulder, glowing faintly. It didn't hurt. In fact, it felt calm. The only thing that troubled him was the glowing mark on his chest. It hadn't faded since the moment it appeared. The door opened without sound. 2 Sarathian guards entered, followed by a smaller figure wearing flowing silver robes. It was a translator drone, hovering gently beside the robed figure. The device blinked blue and began to speak in a soft robotic voice. "The Queen wishes to speak with you," it said in English. Orion blinked. "The Queen now?" The robed Sarathian nodded. Orion stood slowly. His uniform was torn and dirty, but there was no helping that. The guards motioned for him to follow. As he walked through the glowing corridors, he noticed how the Sarathians around him stopped to stare. Some looked curious, others fearful. He could hear whispers, though he couldn't understand their language. When they reached the Great Hall, Queen Lysara was waiting. She stood beside a pool of clear blue water that reflected the ceiling's light like stars. Her long robe shimmered softly, and the glowing mark on her arm was hidden beneath a silver band. But her eyes, bright, calm, and wise, watched him carefully. "Welcome, human," the translator said, repeating her words in English. "I am Lysara, Queen of the Sarathian Empire. Orion hesitated, then gave a respectful nod. Captain Orion Vale, Earth Defense Fleet. Lysara studied him, her expression unreadable. You were found within the royal territory, she said through the translator. You fought in the war against us. I didn't mean to come here, Orion said quickly. My ship was destroyed. I was trying to survive. The Queen nodded slowly. Yes, fate often hides its purpose. He frowned slightly. You keep saying that word, fate, why? She raised her hand, showing the faint glow beneath the band. This mark, she said softly, is not a simple light. It is the mark of the royal line. It responds only once in 1,000 years, to one whose destiny is tied with mine. He stared at her, confused. You think that's me? The mark never lies, she replied. When it shines, it means our fates are bound. Orion shook his head, half smiling. I think your mark is broken, Your Majesty. I'm just a soldier who crashed here. The Queen's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. Perhaps. Or perhaps you do not yet understand what you are meant for. The translator paused briefly as Lysara dismissed her guards. Soon the vast hall was silent, with only the sound of soft water nearby. For the first time, Orion saw the Queen not as an enemy, but as a person, a leader, burdened by duty and loneliness. You do not seem afraid, she said. Fear doesn't help much in war, he replied quietly. She tilted her head. War. That is something your kind seems to know well. So does yours, he said, not unkindly. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two leaders from different worlds, both shaped by endless conflict. Finally, Lysara gestured to the pool beside her. Come, she said. See what the mark means. Orion hesitated but stepped forward. As he approached, the water's surface began to ripple and glow. A holographic image formed above it, an ancient vision of a Sarathian queen standing beside a shadowed figure. Together they faced a dark storm that seemed to devour the stars. The prophecy of unity, Lysara said softly. It speaks of a warrior from beyond the stars who will stand beside the queen when darkness returns. Together they will decide the fate of our people. Orion stared at the image. You think I'm that warrior? The mark says you are, she answered calmly. He looked down at his glowing chest, then at her. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but I didn't come here to fulfill prophecies. I just want to get back to my people. Lysara's eyes softened. Perhaps fate brought you here for that very reason, to see beyond war, to find what peace could not. He didn't know how to reply. The translator repeated her words slowly, their meaning echoing in his mind. To see beyond war. He had spent his whole life fighting. Maybe she was right. Maybe he didn't know what peace looked like anymore. Over the next few days, Orion was kept in the royal compound, not as a prisoner but not free either. The Queen allowed him to move within certain areas, watched by guards who no longer pointed their weapons at him. She sent scholars to teach him about Sarathian language and culture. At first he resisted, but curiosity slowly won. Their language was smooth and melodic, full of meaning hidden in tone. When he spoke a few words correctly, even the guards seemed surprised. The Queen sometimes joined their lessons, watching quietly, asking him questions about Earth, its oceans, its music, its history. In return, she told him about her world, how Sarathians grew their cities like living organisms, how their technology worked in harmony with nature, how their people believed in the threads of fate, invisible lines connecting all living things. One evening, during a quiet walk in the royal garden, Orion asked, Do you really believe all this fate, prophecy, destiny? Lysara looked up at the twin moons shining above the crystal towers. Belief is what gives people hope, she said softly. And hope gives life meaning. Without it, even victory feels empty. He understood her more than he expected. He had seen too many battles that left nothing but silence behind. But what if the prophecy is wrong? He asked. What if I'm not the one you think I am? She turned to him, her eyes gentle. Then I will still be grateful that fate brought you here. Because for the first time in many years I have spoken with someone who sees me as more than a ruler. He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. But not everyone shared the Queen's calm acceptance. In the shadows of the palace, whispers grew among the royal council. Many Sarathian nobles believed the human was dangerous. Some thought he was a spy sent by Earth. Others said his presence was an insult to their queen's purity. Lord Theron, the head of the Sarathian military, spoke in secret with other generals. "The Queen's mark has deceived her," he said coldly. "This human will bring ruin upon us. We must act before she falls under his influence." Plans began to form, silent, hidden, dangerous. Meanwhile, Orion remained unaware. His focus was on learning and surviving. He began to respect Lysara, not just as a queen but as a leader who carried the weight of her people's future with grace. Sometimes when she spoke, he saw loneliness in her eyes, and sometimes she looked at him as if searching for an answer she didn't yet understand. One morning, Lysara summoned him to the observatory. The vast dome opened to the stars, and the light from distant constellations filled the room. "I wish to show you something," she said. She waved her hand, and a projection appeared. Images of ruined planets, broken fleets, and dying worlds. "This is what the war has done," she said quietly, "to your people and mine." Orion looked at the destruction, feeling a deep ache in his chest. "Then why keep fighting?" "Because neither side believes the other can change," she answered. "But I begin to wonder if fate has brought me someone who can prove otherwise." He turned to her, surprised. "Me? You carry both strength and compassion," she said. "You fight fiercely, yet your eyes do not seek glory. Perhaps that is why the mark chose you." He didn't know how to respond. All he could do was stare at the stars above them, wondering if somewhere far away Earth still fought without him. As the days passed, the tension between human and Sarathian fleets near the border grew. The war was far from over, yet here, inside the heart of the Sarathian Empire, something fragile was beginning, a connection neither side could have predicted. Queen Lysara began to trust the human more. She allowed him into council meetings, even if others protested. And when they stood side by side in those halls of crystal, her mark glowed faintly again. The court watched in silence, unable to deny what they saw. Perhaps fate was real after all. Perhaps the universe had chosen this strange, lost human to change everything. And somewhere deep inside his heart, Captain Orion Vale began to feel it too. That his arrival on this world was no accident. Something greater was unfolding. Something that would bind his life to the Queen's in ways neither could yet imagine. The days passed slowly inside the shining palace of Sarathia Prime. Captain Orion Vale was no longer a prisoner, but neither was he free. Every corridor still had guards. Every room had eyes watching him. Yet something had changed. The Queen's trust had grown. Queen Lysara had begun inviting Orion to her private councils. She listened to his thoughts about peace and war, about leadership and sacrifice. At first, the nobles and generals protested, but the Queen's word was law. "He carries the mark," she reminded them. "If fate chose him, then I will hear what he has to say." Some of the Sarathians nodded in respect. Others hid their anger behind polite smiles. One of them, Lord Theron, the commander of the royal army, was especially silent. His tall frame and dark armor gave him an air of power. He had served the royal line for decades and loved his queen deeply, not as a ruler but as the heart of his world. To him, the human's presence was an insult. He could not understand why Lysara trusted this outsider, and so, in the hidden corners of the palace, new whispers began to rise, whispers of betrayal. Meanwhile, Orion continued to learn about the Sarathians. Their world amazed him. Their cities floated above forests made of crystal. Their ships were alive, grown from seeds of metal and light. They used energy not to conquer, but to balance nature. Sometimes at night he stood on the palace balcony, looking up at the two moons shining in the purple sky. The Queen often joined him there. "You miss your home," she said one evening. Her voice was gentle, carried by the cool wind. "I do," he admitted, "but I'm starting to understand yours. Lysara smiled faintly. Perhaps that is why the mark chose you. It saw what even I could not. He laughed softly. If that's true, your mark has a strange sense of humor. The queen's laughter was quiet but real. Perhaps fate enjoys surprises. Despite the peace inside the palace, tension outside continued to grow. Reports came of human ships gathering near the borders again. Both sides prepared for another battle. The council demanded the queen act quickly. Your Majesty, Lord Theron said during one meeting, we cannot delay. The humans are rebuilding their fleets. If we wait, they will strike first. Lysara looked calm. Then we must speak with them. Not fight again. Theron's jaw tightened. You speak of peace while their soldier sits beside you. Orion sat silently beside her. The queen raised a hand. Captain Vale is not our enemy. Then what is he? Theron asked bitterly. A messenger, a spy? Or something worse? The council chamber fell silent. Lysara's eyes glowed faintly with royal power. He is my guest and my fate-bound ally. I will not hear another word against him. Theron bowed stiffly. As you command, my queen. But in his heart, his anger burned brighter than ever. That night, as stars shimmered above the city, Theron met secretly with two other nobles in the shadowed gardens. The air smelled of iron and flowers. She is blinded by that human, said one of the nobles. If this continues, she will lead us to ruin. Theron's voice was quiet but cold. Then we must save her, even if she hates us for it. The nobles hesitated. You mean? He looked toward the glowing palace towers. The prophecy is false. The queen must be freed from its spell. The human must be removed. None dared speak after that. The decision was made. Orion woke before dawn. Something in the air felt wrong. His instincts, sharpened by years of battle, whispered danger. He reached for the small blade the guards had allowed him for training. The palace was quiet, too quiet. He stepped into the hall. Faint shadows moved at the far end, quick and silent. He followed them through the corridor until he reached the queen's chambers. Two guards were already lying on the floor, unconscious. The door was half open. Without thinking, Orion rushed in. Inside, three masked figures stood near the queen's bed, their plasma daggers glowing faintly. Lysara had woken and was trying to activate her defense field, but it was too late. One of the assassins raised his weapon. Orion didn't stop to think. He charged forward, grabbing the first attacker and throwing him aside. The second swung his blade. Orion blocked it with his arm and kicked him backward. The pain burned through his skin, but he ignored it. The third assassin lunged toward the queen. Orion moved faster than he thought possible. He jumped between them and the glowing blade struck his chest. Lysara screamed as he fell. The blade had pierced deep and the mark on his chest burst into light. The same light flashed on the queen's arm, connecting them with a beam of energy that filled the whole room. The assassins froze, terrified by the sight. The walls trembled and a wave of force threw them back. Guards stormed in moments later, capturing them as the queen knelt beside Orion. Stay with me, she said, pressing her hand over his wound. Do not leave now. Orion tried to speak, but his voice was weak. Guess of fate. Wanted to fight after all. Tears filled the queen's eyes. You foolish human, she whispered. You were not meant to die for me. The glowing light from their marks grew brighter. The energy flowed from her hand into his wound, sealing it. The wound began to close, the burned skin turning whole again. The queen gasped. She could feel her strength leaving her, but she didn't stop. When it was over, Orion was breathing again. The glow faded slowly, leaving silence behind. Lysara's hand trembled, but she smiled faintly. You live. He opened his eyes, weak but alive. I told you. Humans are hard to kill. The news of the attack spread across the city. The people were shocked. The queen had been targeted by her own. The captured assassins confessed under questioning. Lord Theron had ordered the act. The council gathered in anger. Theron was brought before them in chains. His head was bowed, but his eyes were proud. Why? The queen asked quietly. Why betray me, Theron? I did it to save you, he said. You are our queen. You are our world. But this human, he poisons your heart.
The mark is a lie.
The mark saved both our lives, she replied.
Fate is not a lie.
You were blinded by fear? Theron bowed his head. Then I am guilty of that and more. I only wish to protect you. She looked at him sadly. I know. But loyalty without understanding becomes danger. The council decided his punishment. exiled to the distant moons where he would live alone. As the guards took him away, he turned one last time toward the Queen. "When darkness comes, you will see that I was right." In the following days, Orion recovered under the care of Sarathian healers. The Queen visited often, her presence calm and comforting. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching the energy fields outside shift like living colors. "Why did you risk your life for me?" she asked one evening. He smiled faintly. "Because that's what soldiers do. We protect those who can bring peace." She looked at him for a long moment. "Peace is not born from war, Captain. It is born from courage and the courage to trust." "Then maybe," he said quietly, "we're both learning." The people of Sarathia began to whisper new stories of the human warrior who bore the Queen's mark, who had faced death to protect her. Some said he was blessed by the stars. Others said he was the prophecy made real. The Queen said nothing to deny it. Deep inside, she felt it too, that their bond was not an accident. The mark had chosen truly. Their fates were tied now, stronger than before. But in the far reaches of the galaxy, new dangers were rising. Strange signals appeared beyond the nebula frontier, ships larger than any human or Sarathian vessel. Unknown forces were moving among the stars, and both Queen Lysara and Captain Orion could feel it. Something greater was coming, something that would test the strength of their bond and the courage of both their peoples. For now, peace held, but the universe was far from calm. Fate had brought them together. Soon it would demand much more. The fragile peace that Captain Orion Vale and Queen Lysara had created between humans and Sarathians trembled like thin glass. Rumors spread through both fleets. Some humans believed Orion had betrayed his people by standing beside the alien queen. Some Sarathians whispered that their queen was cursed for letting a human share her fate. But while both sides argued, something far worse was approaching. Beyond the edge of the galaxy, in the cold, dark space that no ship dared to travel, a new danger awakened. The Varneks had come. They were not like any known race. They did not send messages, nor did they ask for surrender. They appeared in silence, their ships moving like living shadows. They devoured energy, stripped planets bare, and left only empty shells behind. Even the Sarathian scouts who saw them once never returned. When the first Varneks fleet entered known space, their attack was sudden and unstoppable. Human colonies near the border vanished. Entire Sarathian outposts were wiped away without a single transmission. For the first time in decades, both sides realized they were facing something greater than their hatred. In the great Sarathian capital hall, the council gathered. The air was heavy with fear and mistrust. Lysara stood on the dais, her royal armor shining beneath the blue light of the chamber. Orion stood beside her, silent but strong. "This enemy," Lysara began, her voice calm yet filled with sorrow, "is not bound by borders or pride. The Varneks do not care if you are Sarathian or human. They only destroy." A Sarathian general pounded his staff against the floor. "Then we must strike them first. Gather the fleets and burn their ships before they reach us." Orion stepped forward. "That won't work. I've studied their movements. They don't fight like us. They consume energy, twist it, and use it against anyone who attacks them. You can't defeat them by rushing in. You'll only feed their power." The hall filled with murmurs. Many of the Sarathians still distrusted his words. Queen Lysara turned toward him. "What do you suggest, Captain?" "We fight together," he said simply. "Humans and Sarathians side by side. It's the only way. We combine your technology and our battle experience. Together we have a chance." The council erupted in protests. "Never," shouted one noble. "We will not fight under human command." "Would you rather die with pride than live with reason?" Orion replied coldly. The hall fell silent. His words carried weight. They all knew he was right. Lysara's crest glowed faintly on her arm as if agreeing with him. "Fate has already joined us once," she said softly. "Perhaps it does so again now." Days later, the human and Sarathian fleets gathered in orbit around a desolate moon. Massive carriers from Earth floated beside the shining crystal ships of the Sarathians. Soldiers from both races stared at one another, suspicious yet curious. For many, it was the first time they had seen the other side without firing a weapon. In the center command station, Orion and Lysara stood together, planning their defense. A large holomap displayed the Varnek's advance, a wave of darkness moving through the stars. "They're fast," Orion said. "We have maybe 3 days before they reach this system." Lysara studied the map. "Their path is direct. They do not hide. It is almost as if they know we are waiting." "That's what worries me," Orion muttered. "They've never failed before. They destroy everything they touch. We'll have to be unpredictable." He pointed to a set of coordinates near the twin suns of Zareth. "Here, this is where we'll face them. If we lure them into the solar winds between these suns, the radiation will weaken their shields." Lysara nodded. "And our ships can endure it longer with crystal armor." "Exactly. It gives us an edge. But we'll have to move fast." The Queen placed her hand over her crest. It glowed faintly again, a reminder of their shared destiny. "Then we move together," she said quietly. "For all worlds." When the Varneks arrived, the stars themselves seemed to fade. Their ships were like dark clouds, alive and shifting, absorbing light. No words, no signals. Only the hum of power that made even machines tremble. The battle began with silence. Then the void exploded into chaos. Human missiles streaked across space, guided by Sarathian energy fields. The Varneks absorbed the first wave, glowing with eerie blue fire. But the second wave came hidden inside radiation storms from the twin suns, confusing their energy senses. "Now!" Orion shouted. Lysara's command ships opened their crystal lances, releasing a blinding storm of pure light. The combined attack tore through the Varneks' ranks, scattering them. But the victory was brief. The Varneks adapted fast. Their ships began absorbing the light, bending it into weapons. One of the human carriers was struck, breaking apart in a silent flash. Orion's hands clenched around the console. "We need to change tactics. Redirect Group 3 and 4 to the upper field." Lysara turned toward him, her eyes fierce. "Our ground forces are ready. If they breach orbit, we fight them below. They won't reach the surface," Orion said. "Not while I'm still breathing." The Queen looked at him for a brief moment, her crest shining brighter. "Fate may hold you to that promise." Hours passed like minutes. The battle stretched across space. Both fleets were damaged, but neither broke. Orion's ship took several hits, yet he refused to retreat. Every command he gave saved lives. Every maneuver Lysara planned struck deep into the enemy formation. Together they were unstoppable, a living symbol of unity. Then came the final wave. The Varneks brought forth a massive ship, larger than a city. It glowed with the energy of a dying star. The sensors screamed warnings. Lysara's eyes widened. "That is their core vessel. If it reaches the twin suns, it will consume their energy and destroy this system." Orion slammed his hand on the console. "We have to stop it before it charges." The Queen took a deep breath, her crest pulsing like a heartbeat. "There is one way. Our ancient weapon, the solar lance. But it requires a living conduit to focus its energy." Orion frowned. "That's suicide." "Perhaps," she said softly. "But this is the only way to save everyone." Without hesitation, she activated the ritual controls. The golden crystals around her throne pulsed, channeling energy toward her. The light grew brighter surrounding her body. "Lysara, stop," Orion shouted, stepping forward. "You'll destroy yourself." Her eyes met his. "You once threw yourself in front of death to protect me. Let me do the same for all." But before the energy could reach its peak, Orion moved beside her, grabbing her hand. The surge of power leapt into him too. Pain seared through his veins, but he refused to let go. "We do this together," he said through clenched teeth. The crest on Lysara's arm merged with the light from his wound. The same mark that had connected them since their first meeting. The solar lance fired, a beam of pure energy cutting through space. It struck the Varnek's core ship, shattering it into glowing fragments. The explosion lit the stars. When the light faded, silence returned to the galaxy. The Varnek's fleet was gone. Only drifting debris remained. Inside the command room, the Queen lay weakly on the floor. Orion knelt beside her, barely conscious but alive. The glow on her crest dimmed, but it did not fade completely. "Did we do it?" he whispered. Lysara smiled faintly. "Yes, the suns still burn. You saved them." Again, he shook his head slowly. "No, we saved them." Her hand rested on his. "Then our fates are truly one." As the surviving fleets began rescue operations, messages spread across the galaxy. Humans and Sarathians had fought together and won. The story of their unity reached every world. But for Orion and Lysara, the war had cost more than energy or strength. It had bound their souls forever. The fate that once seemed like a mistake had become the destiny of two worlds. And somewhere beyond the quiet stars, fate itself seemed to smile. The war was over, but the stars were silent. After the final battle at the twin suns of Zareth, both fleets drifted in space and broken but victorious. The Varneks were gone, their ships scattered like dust among the light of two burning stars. What remained was the quiet echo of survival. Aboard the Sarathian flagship Alarion, Captain Orion Vale lay in the med bay, his body covered with faint blue light. Machines hummed softly around him, reading both human and alien signs. He had been unconscious for 3 days. Beside him, Queen Lysara sat on a crystal chair, her own strength still weak. Her royal crest was dim, its glow now a soft pulse that matched his heartbeat. Doctors and healers had told her something strange. Their life forces had become linked. When one's pulse slowed, the others followed. When one's energy rose, the others did too. Fate had tied them together, not only by choice but by the energy that had saved the galaxy. Lysara looked at him quietly. His face was calm, peaceful, though scars from the battle still marked his skin. She had never seen a being so fragile and yet so unbreakable. For a long time she had ruled with logic and law, but this human had taught her something greater. Courage that came from heart, not command. When Orion finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her. "You're still here," he said weakly. "I could not leave," Lysara replied softly. "You stopped the light from consuming me." He gave a faint smile. "Guess we saved each other again." There was silence for a moment. The hum of the ship filled the air, soft and distant. Then Lysara spoke again. "The Council wishes to meet you when you are able. The galaxy has changed. There are choices to make." "Choices?" he repeated, his voice still faint. "Yes," she said, standing. "Peace must be shaped, not left to chance." 2 days later, the council of both races gathered, Sarathians and humans, sitting together in the same hall for the first time in history. The great chamber was filled with banners of both worlds. The atmosphere was cautious, yet hopeful. At the center stood Queen Lysara, tall and calm. Beside her, dressed in the dark uniform of the Earth Alliance, stood Orion Vale. When the meeting began, a human admiral spoke first. "Captain Vale, by your command and sacrifice, humanity owes you honor beyond measure. We offer you the title of Star Guardian and leadership of the new joint fleet." A Sarathian elder rose next. "And our queen, by your guidance, has brought salvation. The Sarathian people shall remember the human warrior who shared her fate. Let our histories be written together." The hall filled with respectful silence, but Orion shook his head slowly. "I'm honored," he said, his voice firm yet humble. "But I don't deserve those titles. I didn't fight for glory or power. I fought because it was right." He looked around the room, meeting both human and alien eyes. "We almost destroyed each other once. Then we stood together and survived. That's what matters. Not titles. Not crowns. Just peace." Lysara watched him quietly. His words touched something deep within her. She could see how the others listened, truly listened, to him. His voice carried strength, but not pride. When the meeting ended, a new treaty was signed. It was called the Zareth Accord, named after the system where they had fought side by side. The agreement promised unity, trade, and shared defense between the two species. It was more than a document. It was a beginning. That night, Lysara stood by the observation deck of her flagship, looking at the twin suns burning far away. The war was finally over, but her heart felt heavy. The crest on her arm glowed faintly again, the mark that tied her fate to Orion's. She heard footsteps behind her. "You should be resting," came Orion's voice. She smiled slightly. "And you should be commanding a fleet, Captain. Yet here you are." He walked to her side, staring at the same stars. "I've seen enough war for a lifetime. I'd rather learn how to live in peace." There was silence between them for a moment. The stars reflected in her eyes like silver fire. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Regret what?" "Becoming part of my fate." Orion turned toward her, his expression calm. "It wasn't your fate," he said. "It became ours." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the engines filled the space around them. Then Lysara reached out her hand and touched the faint light on his wrist, the same glow that mirrored her crest. "This bond," she said quietly, "it is not something our people understand. To them it is strange, unnatural." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But sometimes the strangest things are the most important." Her eyes softened. "You speak like a philosopher." He chuckled lightly. "Just a tired soldier." Over the next weeks, rebuilding began. Human engineers worked side by side with Cerathian architects. Cities damaged by war were repaired. New colonies were built together, half human, half Cerathian. For the first time in history, two races that once hated each other shared the same dream. Lysara and Orion traveled from world to world, speaking to both peoples. Wherever they went, crowds gathered. To some, they were symbols of hope. To others, they were proof that destiny could unite even the most distant hearts. But not everyone accepted the new world easily. There were still those who whispered that the Queen's fate had been tainted, that no ruler should share her life with a human. And on the human side, some leaders feared that Orion's loyalty had shifted. One evening, in the quiet of her royal chamber, Lysara looked troubled. Orion noticed immediately. "They don't trust us," she said. "Even after everything." He leaned against the wall. "Change takes time. We can't fix centuries of fear in a few months." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Perhaps fate made a mistake." He shook his head. "Fate doesn't make mistakes. It just gives us choices." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "And what would you choose, Captain?" He smiled softly. "You already know." The day came when Orion was to return to Earth. The new alliance required representatives from both sides, and he had been chosen to speak before the Earth Assembly. Lysara stood by the docking bay as the transport ship prepared for launch. The light from the stars reflected on her silver armor. "You will return?" she asked quietly. "I will," he promised. "I still have a promise to keep, to see this peace last." She nodded slowly. "Then go, human warrior. Let the stars guide you." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "And what will you do, Your Majesty?" Lysara looked toward the stars. "Rule, but not as before. I will not rule through fear or bloodlines. I will rule through unity. That is what you taught me," he smiled. "Then I guess fate chose well after all." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Our bond, it still glows. Even now, maybe it means this isn't the end," he said. "Maybe it never will be." With that, he turned and boarded the ship. As the engines roared to life, Lysara watched the vessel rise into the dark sky. The mark on her arm pulsed once, bright and warm, like a heartbeat. Months later, on the human homeworld, Orion stood before the Earth Assembly. His words were calm and steady as he spoke of unity, not dominance. "We have seen what happens when we let fear divide us," he said. "But we've also seen what happens when we stand together. The stars are wide, and there's room enough for all of us." When the speech ended, the hall erupted in applause. The message of peace had taken root. Far away in her royal palace, Queen Lysara felt a sudden warmth on her crest, a faint pulse, like a whisper across the stars. She smiled, knowing he had kept his promise. Years passed. The galaxy entered a new era. Trade flowed between worlds, and both civilizations grew stronger than ever. Statues of a human and a Cerathian queen stood in the halls of history, not as rulers, but as symbols of unity. And somewhere in the quiet between stars, two souls still shared the same heartbeat. Fate had not made a mistake. It had simply brought together two warriors who refused to give up on hope. Because sometimes the smallest accident can change the course of the entire universe.